forth. Cass down in Pittsburgh, Dee over in Edmonton, Jan down in Nevada, right on, Patty from Vancouver, and Jerry in Whistler. Well, welcome everybody. So good to have you all online here. And for those of you that I have not met before, I'm Jordan from Mind and Soil. I founded the business back in December of 2020. And I take a bit of a different approach with things in that we are entirely focused on connecting individuals to the mental health benefits that come from gardening. So those of you that have been gardening for multiple seasons, and let me know in the chat function, have you been gardening for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, more than that? How many years have you been gardening for? Those of you that are on the more experienced side, I bet that a big part of why you're looking forward to hardening off and transplanting your babies into the garden is because that means more time being spent in that garden and just how good it feels. And for those of you that are on the newer side to gardening, I know that it can be a little bit daunting, a little bit overwhelming. We don't necessarily always know what we need to be doing. And that can ultimately inhibit those mental health benefits from kind of coming to be. And so a huge part of our responsibility here at Mind and Soil is to be doing free events like this to take as much of the guesswork out of gardening so it's as easy as possible for you to be getting your hands dirty and feeling just how calming and soothing and restorative gardening is. And so folks, what I encourage you to do right now is just below this video, there's a little button that says subscribe. And I encourage you to subscribe to our channel here because we put out multiple videos every single week to be helping you through the season. And if you ever leave a comment on one of those videos with, say, a question of something that you're unsure about, we answer it within 24 hours. So we're going to be supporting you all through the season. And speaking of questions, as you have questions that roll through this evening, please do type those into the chat function because we have the one and only lovely Mandy who's going to be helping to moderate the chat function and is one of the most incredible gardeners that I know. So I want to pass it over to Mandy for her to shed a little bit of light on what her role is over at West Coast Seeds.
Hi, everybody. Yes, I work over at West Coast Seeds where I initially start some seeds for the trials that we grow out on the farm there. We have a field and some raised beds and some in-ground beds as well, and a bird and bee garden that we keep established throughout the year. So yeah, I'm over there helping us grow out that stuff and make sure the farm is good to go and encouraging other gardeners in the community.
Absolutely. And folks, as you see on the screen there, they've got the West Coast Seeds farming account, which is different to the West Coast Seeds Instagram account. I think Mandy posts some of the pictures on there. You get a bit more of a behind the scenes look and feel in terms of what's actually going on at the farm at West Coast Seeds. And just some really, really cool trials and designs that they build out and that you get to see come to life over the course of the season there. So folks, if you are all set and ready for us to begin diving into our topic this evening, then in the chat function, go ahead, type in "let's grow," and we'll begin diving into our topic at hand, which is of course all around hardening off and transplanting. So what we're going to do is kind of break this down into 3 key areas for us to move through this evening. And the first piece that we're going to talk through is just kind of like what this whole hardening off thing is and why it matters so much. After that, we're going to go through the 7-day process that I utilize for hardening off my plant babies. And by doing this, I have never lost a single seedling before. But I've got a bit of an update on that. For those of you that know that I planted a tomato outside on April 2nd, I got to share what's going on in that little experiment. And then the final piece that we're going to cover off on is how to go about transplanting our seedlings into the garden, their forever home, so they're set up to absolutely thrive this season. Alrighty, I'm seeing a whole bunch of Let's Grows rolling through from Jessica and Gary and Donna and Lonnie, Tice, right on. So let's begin diving into it. And why on earth does this hardening off thing matter so much? And so when we think about our plant babies that we've started from seed or that we've bought potentially from a nursery or a seedling sale, they have been growing thus far in a very comfortable and controlled environment. But when we move them outside into the garden, they are going to be exposed to all kinds of intensity and variability that they have not yet experienced. So similar to, our little baby or our kiddo that, we're taking to a swimming lesson or something along those lines, we're not just going to launch them into the deep end and say, figure it out, start treading water, but rather we want to incrementally introduce them to those new variables. And so when we think about our plant babies, what are some of those elements that have been in play? Well, from a temperature perspective, our indoor seed starting station that each of us are probably utilizing that have started seeds, it's probably right around 20 Celsius, 71, 72 Fahrenheit. And it stays that temperature 24 hours per day. It doesn't fluctuate up and down. Once we transplant them into the garden outside, they could be experiencing lows, especially this season in coastal BC where it's been so cold, as low as 5 Celsius and highs as high of plus 30 Celsius. So that's a lot more intensity and a lot more variability than what they would be used to indoors. Now, what about from the lighting perspective? Well, up until now, they've been under grow lights. And once we move them outside, they're going to be in direct sun, getting those UV sun rays. And how much more intense is that? We'll take a look at this. Using my light meter app, underneath a grow light, it's likely that our plants are kind of getting around 7,000 to 15,000 lumens, depending on the type of grow light that you're using and how close they are to the plants. What happens in direct sun? Take a look at this. Up to over 76,000 lumens. So more than 10 times the intensity outside in that direct sun. Once again, we want to prepare them for this. Now, what about the air and the wind? Well, some of us might be utilizing a bit of an oscillating fan, which is just like such a nice and gentle and comfortable breeze that would be cruising through there. Outside in the garden, I'm going to show you a video of earlier this week on my end, and there are some serious gale force winds that are rolling through there. We need to get our plant babies ready for that. And lastly, from like a moisture perspective, so far, we've been giving them the most gentle watering with our turkey baster right at the soil level and exactly when they need it. Outside, that's out of our control. Mama Nature, she's telling us when that rain is coming. And so they could have days on end of rain. And then right after that, they could have days in a row of drought. So once again, we need to be preparing them for that. So if there's one thing that I want you to take in terms of what hardening off is and why it matters, it is the process of us incrementally preparing our plant babies for that variability and that intensity of the outdoor garden. So that's the process that we are going to be going through before we ultimately transplant them. And it really begs the question then, when do I get started with that? When do we begin this hardening off process? And so there's two key temperatures that we want to be looking for on this. So for our cooler weather crops, such as our kale, our peas, our broccoli, maybe our Swiss chard and celery, we want to wait to transplant until the average nighttime low is 8 Celsius. And then for our warmer weather crops, such as our tomatoes, our peppers, our squashes, zucchinis, we want to wait until that average nighttime low is above 10 Celsius. And now on our last happy hour, I shared that I want to put this to the test a little bit. I want to see how a plant does if I transplant it way earlier on than that. Let's see what happens. And so a couple of things have happened. First thing, I'm not sure if anybody experienced this day earlier this week, but there was a huge hailstorm that came through. And those plant babies, they were not too happy with me on that particular day. And then on top of that, on April 2nd, one of the experiments that I'm running for April was actually transplanting a baby into the garden. And this is a tomato, so it wants that 10 Celsius weather at the beginning of April. And I really babied it. I gave it a leaf mulch so that there was more mulch in there. And then I also went ahead and gave it some landscape fabric to draw in more of that heat from the sun. And then I put some rocks down on that. And finally, I put a DIY greenhouse over top of it to try and get it as warm as possible in there for that plant baby. How is it doing right now? Well, folks, literally earlier today, I took a picture of it and this is where it's at. So I would say that this is kind of in purely surviving mode, not at all in thriving mode. And what has been so fascinating about this little experiment is from the point that I took it outside and started to leave it outside overnight, it has not put on any growth whatsoever. It has fully stopped its growth mode. But at the same time, I have a set of seedlings I started on the exact same day as these that I've left inside underneath the grow lights, and they've continued to be putting on new growth. So the biggest thing that I can kind of recommend or encourage on that front is to exercise a bit of patience. I know it's challenging. I know that we want to get things out there. And by all means, if like you are so inclined to do it, then do it. Like absolutely, first and foremost, do what brings you the most joy in your gardening practice. But also be aware of the fact that plants like probably might survive, but on top of that, they just might not grow all that much. So exercising a little bit of patience, it's ultimately going to set them up to thrive even more there. And the good news, folks, is that I've got the warm happy hour shirt on. I am confident, I believe that warmth is on the horizon. And so what that means is that over the course of these coming weeks here, probably at some point in late April, early May, it will be time to begin that hardening off process. And so what I want to begin diving into next is that actual 7-day process. And for those of us that have seeds that we started and are growing underneath the grow lights indoors, those are what we are going to be taking through the hardening off process. But if you don't have seedlings right now and you're needing to be buying some, then you could of course go to the nursery, but over at West Coast Seeds, they're doing a seedling sale coming up as well. And I want to pass it over to Mandy for just a couple of moments to shed a little bit of light on that seedling sale that they have just around the corner from now.
Hi, yes, we're so excited for that. May 6th and 7th. So you're going to pre-order your babies online. We've got herbs and flowers and tomatoes and peppers and some squash. And they're all looking super fabulous, getting nice and toasty in the greenhouse right now. So definitely check out the website, make sure you get your pre-orders in. It's a great system. You come drive through, pick up your babies. We'll be happy to bring them to your car and off you go your way. So it's a really exciting thing.
Amazing. Yeah. And I've been out there to the greenhouse in the past. It's really, really incredible, everything that they've got going on out there, and just the level of care that they put towards all those plant babies. You get them from there, you're going to have really, really healthy, thriving plants coming home to your garden to ultimately end up in their forever homes there. So with that being said, you get back from West Coast Seeds or you have your plant babies inside, and it is time to begin that 7-day hardening off process. Now, as we go through this, folks, if you have any questions, fire those into the chat function there. And if you've been enjoying things so far, then you can go ahead and hit the like button on the video here as well. That helps us out big time. But we'll take a pause in a couple moments to answer a few of those questions, and Mandy will get to them as we kind of go through as well here. And so again, as we begin diving into the 7-day process, the key thing to keep in mind is incrementally exposing them to the intensity and variability. So let's get started. And one more final piece actually is that tomorrow morning, I'm going to be emailing out to each and every one of you a guide that I have put together for this 7-day hardening off process. And what you can see is it's literally got day 1, day 2, day 3, all the way to day 7, exactly what you need to be doing so that you can just kind of checklist through it, make sure that your plant babies are all good to go. That will be in your inbox tomorrow morning. So let's get started with day 1 here. And for day 1, we are taking our plant babies outside into the sun for 2 hours. And so what we do here is basically take them out of the seed starting station into wherever our growing environment is, and we pop them down. So for myself personally, and folks, keep in mind, there's no right way and no wrong way to do this, but this is just my personal preference and approach here, is that I like to put them kind of in the exact area that they are ultimately going to be getting transplanted into. And what that means is that on day 1, I want to be exposing them to full sun. And I do this instead of putting them into like a shaded area, because what I'm thinking is that like I need to give my plant babies a little bit of tough love right now so that they can get used to that intensity and that variability. But I'm going to do it in just kind of a smaller increment than doing it all at once there. Again, rather than kind of throwing them into the deep end and saying start tread water, I'd be there in the deep end and kind of catch them and get them used to that area, that environment. So in this instance, putting them right on the bed that I'm going to be transplanting them into at the end of this presentation, and I'm leaving there for 2 hours. At the end of 2 hours, all that I'm doing is grabbing them, bringing them back inside and popping them back into the seed starting station underneath the grow light for the remainder of the day. And so for myself, I have my grow lights on an automatic timer for 13 hours per day. So at whatever time that I took them outside, my grow light stayed on, and then I bring them back in and it stays on for the exact same 13 hours per day that I go off of there. So that's what I'm doing on that front. Great question came through from Rosalind. What time of day are you doing it for day one? I did that kind of like mid-afternoon. You could do it in the morning time. You could do it in the peak of the day. You could do it towards the end of the day. Again, the key piece is that we're doing it only for 2 hours so that it is not an incredibly long period of time there. Then they'll be all good. So day one, done and dusted. We move on to day two. What are we doing on day two? We're bringing them outside for 4 hours. But folks, I got the raincoat on today. So we're going to start getting exposed to some of those elements that our plant babies are going to experience. So I bring them outside, put them exactly where they are going to be living. And if there was rain coming down on this day, I let them hang out in that rain. Again, I want them to feel and to see and to experience that, but only for a 4-hour period, not for like a 48-hour period all at once, which our plant babies are going to get 48 hours of rain, especially here in coastal BC. So what I can be doing, because on this particular day, it wasn't raining where I live. So I can simulate this on my plant babies. And what I'm doing, turning on my tap, I'm grabbing my hose, I'm putting it onto the shower setting, and I'm giving these babies a really serious watering. This is not dissimilar to what your plant babies would be getting with rain coming down from up above. And I'm giving them a heck of a lot more water than that turkey baste or two of water that they're getting. But simultaneously, a lot less than multiple hours or a full day worth of rain coming down. Again, I'm giving them a little bit of tough love, getting them all set and ready for the season here. It hurts me a little bit to be doing it because I just want to kind of baby them, but ultimately I know this tough love will help them out. So after those 4 hours, all that we're doing, we're grabbing our plant babies, we're popping them back inside underneath that grow light. They continue to hang out there for the remainder of the day. The grow light turns off on its own after about 13 hours, and they get to kind of recover from that next round of being exposed to the elements in the outdoor garden. All righty, let's continue along to day three. After kind of like day 4 and 5, which is very similar to day 3, I'm going to pause to answer a couple of the questions there. But folks, day 3, and we've got more elements that we're getting exposed to. On this day, I am bundled up, bringing my plant babies outside for 6 hours on the day here. So I bring them outside, I pop them right down where they're going to be transplanted into. And now it was pretty blustery. Take a look at this on one of the days just before I started transplant them. All kinds of wind rolling through the backyard. And I'm thinking through, how do I go about preparing them potentially for this wind? And again, this video of the wind through the trees there happened a few days before the hardening off process commenced. And so I need to expose them to it myself. What do I do to kind of simulate that wind? Well, folks, I go into my shed, pop the door open, grab one of my favorite tools, the leaf blower, and I'm heading back out to the garden. And I'm sorry, babies, I don't want to do this to you, but it's ultimately for your best interest. And giving them some huge blasts of wind. Now, with that being said, do you need to go to the store, buy a leaf blower just to be hardening off your plant babies? Absolutely not. But again, I wanted to kind of articulate and show this point of it being a good thing for us to be exposing them to some of that intensity, some of that variability, so that they're all set, they're toughened up, they're ready to go for when the time comes to be moving them and transplanting them into the garden. So I like to do this more out of a little bit of fun than something that you actually seriously need to do in terms of the wind factor, but it does not hurt. All right, so day 4 and day 5, what we're going to be doing on these 2 days is essentially the exact same thing, but just for longer time increments. So for day 4, we're leaving them outside for 10 hours, effectively the full day. And then on day 5, we're going all the way up to 12 hours, 7 in the morning until 7 p.m. at night. And on these days, you might notice some wilting on your plants. And you might even notice wilting like this on one of the earlier days if it's in a really hot stretch. Know that when you see this wilting, that is 100% normal. And this is, again, the plant just adjusting to that intensity and variability. And so if you do notice wilting on your plants, the one thing that you're going to want to do is essentially just kind of double check that there is moisture in the soil. So take your finger and poke down a couple of inches, make sure that it is all good, that there is some moisture in there. If there isn't, give them a good watering. But if there is some moisture in there, then they're going to bounce back over the course of the coming kind of 24 hours or 12 hours in this instance before you take them back outside for the next day there. So I want to pause for a moment before we dive into day 6, because day 6 is when we kind of take the next step in this adventure, to dive into the chat function real quick here and just to see if there's any questions that are coming through. All right, question from Lindsay here. How do I calibrate my min-max thermometer? You've got 2 dials on there. One of them is going to move the maximum and the other one is going to move the minimum. So you just got to figure out by spinning which one, which dial it moves. And then you bring them back to the actual temperature on the day to start the day. And then that, that third dial, it's going to push the hot temperature to the maximum and the blue dial to the minimum. So super straightforward on that front. All right, great question from Pat here, and I'd love to hear Mandy's thoughts on this one. So Pat asked, can you vary the time of day you put them out so that you can take advantage of the weather? Mandy, what are your thoughts there? Do you take your plants out at the exact same time, or do you do it at, like, are you flexible to different times over the course of the hardening off process?
Yeah, I usually start off on a really mild side of that, whether it's like the warm morning sun or if you get some really nice warmed up weather in the later afternoon, definitely try that to start. And then, as Jordan sort of said, gradually building over time, you know, choose a time of day that's a little bit on the cooler end of things. Choose a time of day that you notice maybe has like a little bit of a wind to it, but nothing that's going to be too scary for your plant babies, nothing too shocking. We're just trying to prevent shock ultimately when they permanently stay outside for the season. So yeah, if you can gradually build that up, you should be good to go.
Absolutely. And as folks, you could probably already tell, Mandy is much more cuddling than I am with the plant babies and eases them into it versus I'm like middle of the day, go for it. But the, you know, the one piece that I would kind of echo on top of that is that, you know, if you've got something going on in the morning, whether that's work, getting the kids to school, and you don't have time to get them out before that, it's totally okay if you do it a little bit later, a little bit earlier. Again, it's more than anything, it's just this process of incrementally exposing them to the outdoors that we want to be doing. All righty. Now I saw another question in here that I think is a really great one. And Mandy, I'd love to ask it over to you because I know that you've got a little bit more experience with greenhouses. And is there a difference if you are putting it into a greenhouse? So if you're taking your plant baby and ultimately it's being transplanted into a greenhouse, would you be changing up anything in here? You're on mute there, Mandy. That's all right.
Oopsie daisy. Sorry about that.
There you go.
Yeah, so if you're planting it into a greenhouse for the season, essentially there isn't going to be a huge amount of change there from your inside, just maybe double checking the temperatures inside your greenhouse. If it is significantly warmer than where you started your seeds, or if you weren't starting them on a heat mat and you think it could be a bit of a shock to them, you can definitely stick them in a warmer room or by a heater to gradually warm them up. But it's usually not necessary. You're usually good to go to just plant them straight in there. The hardening off is more intended for placing them outside for the growing season, and just dealing with those natural elements outside the greenhouse spoils your babies and protects them from all of that. So you're pretty good.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so I think that was, Eileen that asked that question. Eileen, when we think about it, you know, rain wise, you're going to be able to control the amount of rain or moisture that they're getting in the greenhouse. And then wind wise, they're not really going to be exposed to all that much. Sun wise, we do want to prepare them for that if they've been in an indoor environment. And the big one is, of course, temperature there, as Mandy alluded to. So what you would want to be doing before beginning that hardening off process is utilizing something like a min-max thermometer to understand how cool your greenhouse gets over the course of the evening. And I'll shed a little bit more light on that towards the end of our session here. And one last question there from Darlana. Do you protect them from the wind? Darlana, I think it was pretty clear after that video. I think you sent that through beforehand that I give them all the wind that they can handle. All righty. I'm just going to get one or two more here. Let's see here.
Jordan, there was somebody who actually, a couple people had asked, a couple folks wanted to know what the app was you were using for your light meter. At the beginning of the slides.
Great question there. So the app that I used is quite literally called Light Meter, LIGHTMETER. However, I haven't seen that one in the Android App Store over the last little while. And so what I've started to utilize is this new one called Lux Meter, LUXMETER. And I'm still familiarizing myself with the readings on it. So those are really, good ones to have on hand there. Perfect. And so I think let's get one more question here. So this is one that I'm really interested in. And Mandy, I know you've had success with growing onions in the past. So Brian was asking, what about hardening onion seeds that never get past the wispy stage before they fade away? Mandy, do you have any tips, tricks, techniques when it comes to onions to get them growing really, really well, both early on and through kind of like the transplanting into the garden phase?
Yes. So with the onions, you definitely want to go a little bit lighter on the watering. They transplant a little bit easier and harden off a little easier when they're not too cold with that extra water in there. So just ease up a little bit on that as you're hardening off. Maybe choose a sheltered location, somewhere that isn't quite as harsh right off the bat. Like Jordan has touched on, you definitely want to be almost a little extra gentle with these guys. And what I find with onions is I get a lot of success when I cut them back a few times before transplanting or hardening them off. So essentially when they get to like about 3 to 4 inches tall as a seedling in their little tray, I'll do a first haircut, and then, maybe a few weeks later, I'll give them another haircut. And this just focuses the energy down and creates, a generally stronger plant, a hardier plant. And it'll help with that leggy growth that you continue to get. So.
Amazing. Amazing answer there. I've been giving my onions inside here a couple of haircuts because I really want them to make it to the garden and really be doing well out there. And I want to take one last question here because I think it's really good. There's a couple questions in terms of greenhouses and what to kind of be doing transplanting into those, which we're going to touch on in a couple minutes because there's something that I utilize on that front. And then we can do some more Q&A on that towards the end. But Mandy, there was a question that came through here that I think is really relevant to the seedling sale that you got going on there. This is from Aaron. The plants bought at stores or from a seedling sale, do they need to be hardened off as well? Or can you plant them directly into the garden? What do you do when you buy seedlings, either at your seedling sale or at a like a nursery, garden center, etc.?
Great question. So for our seedling sale, specifically at West Coast Seeds, we do not harden off any of the seedlings prior to our sale date. We do generally mention that to people as they're picking up as well, and do get a lot of questions on that, but we do not harden them off. So if you're picking them up from us the first weekend of May, you definitely maybe want to give them about a week and follow Jordan's directions, stick them out for, a few hours a day, gradually increasing it. We've had some pretty weird weather here on the lower mainland with hail and sun and whatnot. So just be mindful of that as you're transitioning them into your garden. And if you're grabbing them from another nursery, it's definitely a good idea to check with staff. A lot of nurseries are outside and just sort of covered more or less. So they're a little bit more adaptable in the sense that they've already been pre-exposed to some harder elements, some lower temperatures. And but some nurseries are definitely much more controlled indoors. So you definitely want to check specifically with them and just sort of see what their process has been thus far.
Yeah, totally. And so, kind of ask them that question in terms of like, how much exposure they've gotten. And then folks, like the big thing, right, is that like you can always veer on the side of caution if you want, and just give it those couple extra days of incrementally exposing them to longer periods and then ultimately overnight, which we're about to talk about. And then that's going to allow you to kind of get to know the plant and how it adjusts to your environment. Folks, before we dive along here, I would just quickly love to hear how this has been so far. Are you getting value from this? Has been useful? Let us know in the chat function how all of this is landing. And as a couple of those kind of pop through there, Elizabeth asked a question. This is the last one that we'll answer for right now before diving along into day 6. Elizabeth asked, how long should I leave my grow lights on for? There are no instructions when I recently bought one from you. I apologize for that, Elizabeth. I've had mine on for 24/7, growing some indoor greens to eat now. So Elizabeth, if you check out our video, the simplest method to starting seeds, I think maybe Mandy or Mike will be able to link you to that in the chat function here. What you'll see in there is that I leave mine on for 12 to 13 hours per day. And so I do that 12 to 13 hours per day, and then I turn them off because I want the plants to feel like they're going through a nighttime cycle there. And then on top of that, if anybody, I heard this tip, I think it was just earlier today. I want to say it was from Lindsay in the community. If you want a way to double the amount of seedlings that you can be growing under your grow lights, Lindsay has cracked the code on it. And so what you do is that you've got, say your one tray of seedlings that fits perfectly underneath your grow light, and you put the grow light on for 12 hours. And that's perfect amount of time. But then at the end of the 12 hours, rather than turning the grow light off, you move it 2 feet over where you have a second tray of seedlings, and you leave it over top of them for the next 12 hours. And then in the morning, you move the grow light back over. You just slide it over to the initial set of seeds. And so now by kind of operating in 12-hour cycles with just one grow light, you've been able to start and have this double the number of seedlings getting the amount of light that they need. So I thought that was a really, really smart little tip from Lindsay on that front to ensure they're getting the right amount of light, but also getting double the amount. All right, seeing some awesome comments coming through. Very useful from Natasha. Sounds good from Wayne. Perfect. Thank you all so much. Let's dive into day number 6 here. And folks, day 6 is always a big one for me because that is the first time that we leave our plant babies overnight outside. So what I'm doing, bringing the plant baby outside, but I'm not bringing it back inside at the end of the day. So we pop it down, and then later in the evening, the sun sets and our babies have their first night in the garden. I always get nervous around this one. I always double check the weather app to make sure that it's not in the middle of a cold snap where it could be getting down to 2 Celsius or 3 Celsius. If I did see that, I would just wait for a couple more days, bring them back inside, extend the hardening off process. But day 6 here, that's the first night that they're staying outside overnight. So do I check on them in the morning? No. Folks, I camp out with my plant babies.
Gonna let them spend their first night out in the garden all on their own. Did you? No, I'll be camped out here the whole night with them, making sure they're okay. Just wish I could give them my toque.
So I'm out there in my tent. Do you need to do that? Absolutely no. Do you need to use a leaf blower? Absolutely no. Am I a little bit extra over the top wearing my finest Hawaiian shirt right now? Absolutely. I'm out there with my plant babies. So next morning rolls around, time to wake up.
How the babies did.
And see how they did. Check it out. Babies are doing good. So we now have taken them through their first evening there. They've made it through. They're looking strong. Justine's wondering, do I read them a bedtime story? I give them some positive affirmations as they go through that evening. And so here at the kind of beginning now of day 7, they've made it through their first evening and they're looking really good, really strong. And so on day 7, it is the exact same process. Nothing changes. We leave it as is. And so what that means is that, where I woke up with the plant babies, they stay right there. I go inside, I make a coffee, I get on with my day, and then they stay in that exact same area overnight. And this is really a great process to go through because we can then kind of just see how they're adjusting to that nighttime low before taking them out of their seed cell and transplanting them into the garden. if after those first 2 nights, they're looking good, then folks, we have completed the 7-day hardening off process, and it is time to begin thinking about transplanting them into the garden, into their forever homes here. So the first thing that I want to do on that front is that I want to check my weather app. And I just want to double check, confirm that there are not any cold snaps coming through, which if we look at the beginning of May last year, what we can see is that there was a low of 3 and a low of 3 the next day there. And so on those particular days, if I saw that, I would basically just wait another day or two. So let's say that Sunday here was day 8, transplant day for our babies, and I knew it was going to get down to 3 Celsius, but then I've got a 7 Celsius day and a little bit warmer after that. I would just bring them back inside that evening and then transplant them on that Sunday evening or on that Monday there. So this is a really great way for anybody that is kind of like wanting to get your plant babies out there and just kind of get them used to the garden. You can really extend this process. You could start taking them outside right now in the middle of the day for a couple of hours and exposing them to the elements, as long as they're not being exposed to that average nighttime low. That's the one piece that we really want to be conscious and aware of here. Now, the next piece is that this is the weather app for Squamish, where I live, but it's not my backyard. And so there've been a couple comments about the min-max thermometer. And folks, I am absolutely in love with this tool, because what this tool has is 3 dials: a black dial, a red dial, and a blue dial. And what happens is that as the temperature climbs, the black dial is the actual like real temperature right now. So as the day gets into the peak of the day, it gets warmer. And what it does is it pushes the red dial all the way up to the hottest maximum temperature that day. And then as we get into the evening, it begins to cool. And then into the middle of the night, it goes all the way down to the minimum temperature that evening. So right now, as you're on the precipice of hardening off and transplanting your babies into the garden, having a min-max thermometer out there where you can be taking a look at it each morning to see what that minimum temperature is going to allow you to know that when you see your weather app saying that it is 5 Celsius, but your backyard and the microclimate that you're growing in stays a couple degrees warmer, because you now know that from your min-max thermometer, you can use that information to ensure your plant babies have the highest likelihood of surviving and then thriving immediately when they get into the garden. And then the other piece that you can utilize at the point of transplanting is that greenhouse approach. So if you have a greenhouse, again, I would be utilizing my min-max thermometer to understand how much warmer is it keeping them. Because the beauty of a greenhouse is that it keeps the warm air in there in the middle of the day. As the sun hits it, it really, really warms up. But at nighttime, there's no sun and there's no insulation. And so by having that min-max thermometer plus your DIY greenhouse, you're going to be able to see, did it actually keep the soil warmer for our plant babies? What I have found from my trials, my experiments, is that this structure right here, you can see the min-max thermometer right down there below it, and it is staying 3 Celsius warmer at nighttime. So when I now see that the nighttime low is going to be 5 Celsius or 6 Celsius, I know that whatever I'm transplanting into with this structure is actually going to be more like 8 or 9 Celsius, and I can get my cool crops into the garden, which is then allowing me to be extending my season both on the beginning and on the end. Now, if you didn't have a structure like this or a larger greenhouse, you can also be utilizing smaller structures like this, which is quite literally just a storage tote from a big box store like Home Depot. And as you can see, I put some holes into the top there just to get a little bit of that airflow coming out, that warm air kind of like bottling up at the top, letting it out. And you can see right there how much better the garlic is growing when it's inside than those that are outside. Took that picture earlier today. So those are some ways that you can go about kind of ensuring that the hardening off or the transplanting now process goes as smoothly as possible. But quick sip of water. There's one final thing that must be done before transplanting and getting those babies into the garden. And folks, It's our graduation photo. Our babies have made it. They have been hardened off. They started as seeds. They're thriving. It is time to send them now off into the big wild world. And they've got all the tools that they need to absolutely thrive. So folks, I better be seeing some pictures over the course of the coming 6 weeks here of you in your finest linens. I've got my floral tie just for that particular day. Who am I kidding? I wear it way more than just that one particular day. And I want to see your graduation photo with your babies all set and ready to go into the garden. Once your graduation photo is all done and dusted, it is one of the best evenings out there, transplant evening. All that we need to do, regardless of if you're in a container or grow bag or raised bed, is dig our hole and then one handful of worm castings into the bottom with 1 scoop of our 444 superfood. I like to use the Hori Hori knife to kind of measure that out, massage it in. Then we grab our plant baby, we loosen it up, we pop it in, backfill with the surrounding soil, and then 1 more handful of worm castings, 1 tablespoon of 444 superfood. We give it a nice big drink of water. And folks, that plant baby is all set, ready to go. Debbie, thank you so much for there. Yes, I know, Colin, I am a very proud plant parent. For those of you early on that were calling me a helicopter parent, I'm guilty. I'm fully guilty of it, but hey, got no shame in it either. So our plant baby all set, ready to go. Folks, if you've covered through all of this, you've hardened it off, you've transplanted it with the nutrients, with the microbes, well, then a couple months later, all of the magic really starts happening where you're now harvesting out of your garden beautiful leafy greens, amazing heads of cabbage and broccoli, incredible tomatoes. And folks, this is the harvest, one of literally many of this size. And the only things that I utilized in my garden last year was organic compost across the top, and then that transplant kit that I just showed you there, the worm castings and the 444 superfood. So folks, if you want to get your hands on one of our transplant kits for this coming season, it comes with 3 bags of worm castings, plus a bag of our 444 superfood. It's what I utilize for transplanting, but then also kind of like a bump in nutrients 6 weeks later, so you can utilize it throughout the season. Then we're offering free shipping to anybody across Canada on all of our orders through the end of the weekend. And the link to grab that is at the description below. The free shipping code is already applied there. If it doesn't apply for any reason, the code is just Let's Grow 5001. I think Mike will pop that into the chat function there. And then on top of that, if you wanted to add on either a min-max thermometer or one of our Hori Hori knives that are like super popular right now, then you can do that. And when you do it this weekend, not only do you get the free shipping, but you also get $15 off the tool there. So your min-max thermometer will be $15 off, or your Hori Hori knife will be $15 off, plus the free shipping. And all the orders that we receive this evening, Mike's going to have those shipped out by noon tomorrow. Everything else is being shipped out beginning of next week. So you'll have all of this in time for transplanting. Speaking of, there's a whole bunch of folks that utilized this last year, had amazing results. And I just love this one quote from Bonnie that I wanted to share as we wrap up here. What Bonnie shared was, last year, I finally had the time to take up gardening. I enjoyed every happy hour, just like these ones that we're on right now, Mind and Soil offered, and I followed Jordan's recommendations to the letter. My son and I planted our seedlings using their worm castings and loved watching them grow. Later, when my garden was overflowing with tomatoes, I went and checked in person. That is true. I used the 444 superfood to keep them going. I had incredible success, and my neighbors couldn't believe it was my first year gardening. Such a lovely way to spend my time and unwind from the rest of life. So folks, would absolutely love to get as many transplant kits out to you as possible. And that is everything that we wanted to cover off on this evening. If you have any questions, begin to fire those into the chat function, because Mandy and I are online here for a couple minutes. We'll get a whole bunch of those answered for you. So speaking of, amazing question that just came through from Carol. And Mandy, would love to hear your thoughts on this one here. How big should your plant babies be before you harden them off?
Yeah, just a couple inches is good. They don't have to be too tall. They don't have to be, too established in any way. They're generally okay. If they're healthy, make sure that your plant looks healthy before you're putting it out, regardless of the height. More than anything, does it need any kind of extra support when you put it out? Are you being mindful about the wind? As long as it's a few inches, you should be good to go.
Love it. And yeah, another way of approaching that is you can kind of go off of when the plant has 4 to 6 true leaves on it. So the first set of leaves that come up are going to be its seed leaves. And then you've got the first kind of couple true leaves that come through. When there's 4 to 6 true leaves on there, it's going to be a couple inches tall, just as Mandy alluded to there, and all set, ready to go to begin the transplanting process. Debbie, I hear you. Deep breath indeed there. Cheryl, thank you so much. I went over to Lisa's place the other day. She's been utilizing our worm castings and having some amazing success. Question from Roslyn, is this kit also good for perennials? So Roslyn, absolutely. I'm utilizing this on my raspberries, my blueberries, strawberries, rhubarb, as well as some of the herbs that I have going. What I love so much about this kit is it's just such a good foundational piece to be utilizing as kind of like an all-purpose approach, to the extent that we literally have people that utilize those products on some of their indoor plants there, especially the worm castings. Question from Darlana, what does 444 actually mean? Darlana, amazing question there. And so 444 stands for the macronutrients that are in that. So when we think about our plant baby, it wants to grow. For it to grow, it needs macronutrients and micronutrients. The macronutrients are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, M, N, P, and K. And so when you see 3 numbers on any kind of organic fertilizer or any bag of soil, and it's 444 or 282 or 18, what that is indicating is the amount of nitrogen as the first number, the amount of phosphorus as the second number, and the amount of potassium as the third number there. So 444, it's a very kind of like mild amount to be going with. It's something that you're not going to burn your plants with, but just give them kind of a really nice feeding with. Perfect. All righty. Question from Danny here. What is the difference between worm castings and compost that is made from red wigglers? So worm castings are a form of compost that goes through the digestive tract of red wigglers. That is the worm castings that we would be providing to you in this transplant kit there. And then compost, on the other hand, is just organic matter that has decomposed, broken down, but has not gone through the digestive tract of a worm. And so when that organic matter goes through the digestive tract of a worm, it's getting coated with all these enzymes and bacteria and breaking down in a 14-day period, whereby at the end, they've pooped it out in the form of a worm casting. And it's just one of like Mother Nature's miracles and beautiful things that worm castings and the bacteria that they get coated in, the enzymes that are in that digestive tract, end up being super beneficial to our plant babies that are in the garden. And so, Dan, if you wanted, you could check out our blog post, Worm Castings 101 from Mind and Soil. And it shares a whole bunch of the kind of like just different studies and experiments that have been done by big university research centers showing how big of an impact worm castings have on yields. All righty. Debbie, thank you so much. Appreciate that. I think that Pat's looking for a link there, and I'm sure we'll be able to get that over to you. Question from Claude. Do you fertilize the seedlings before hardening off? So Claude, for myself, and first of all, great question there. I don't give them any fertilizer or any of our 444 superfood until I transplant them into the beds. So when I start the seeds, I start them in our worm casting seedling mix. And that's got sifted compost, that's got worm castings in it, and that provides them the nutrients and the microbes that they need in kind of like those first 4 to 6 weeks of growing indoors before I transplant them. And then at the point of transplanting, it's at that time that I really want them to go into growth mode there. So I don't do any fertilizing until that magical transplant day. Question from Gabriella. How important is it to check your earth before transplanting? So Gabriella, what I would encourage you to do is look up the video Prepping Your Soils by Mind and Soil by us, and maybe Mike or Mandy will be able to send that over to you there. And that video, and we did a live 1 hour happy hour on it a couple of weeks ago. We talked through exactly how to go about preparing your ground, your soil for the upcoming season. Really, really encourage you to do that and to go through that video before this, because it makes such a big difference if we're planting into a really nice, fertile, well-prepared area versus doing nothing. And we cover exactly how to do that in that video there. Alrighty, I think that we'll take maybe 1 or 2 more questions before wrapping up there. And first one here from Tiffany. Hey, Tiffany, how are you? Hope you're doing well. I know we've sent a whole bunch of messages back and forth on Instagram there. And so Tiffany's question is, when I pot up seedlings to a 4-inch pot, can I still use the seedling mix or switch to the regular worm castings? Tiffany, absolutely use the seedling mix there. So when I pot up any of my plant babies, let me grab one real quick so you can just take a quick look. Here we go. So this is a tomato baby that I've got growing right here, Sun Gold from West Coast Seeds. You can see the size of it and also how green and lush it is. And it has not gotten any fertilizer whatsoever. It has only received the worm casting seedling mix that I alluded to in my response to Claude there. And so that, again, worm casting seedling mix that I know you have there, Tiffany, it has that sifted compost plus the worm castings that provide the nutrients and the microbes for the plant to put on all the growth. And I mean, this plant baby here, it's a good, like, probably 18, 20 inches in height now. So it is putting on a ton of growth with just those pieces. All righty, one last question here. All right, let's see. I've got one that I'm not going to be able to answer. I'm not sure, Mandy, if you'd be able to answer this one, but it comes from an individual. See, I found some fertilizer that is a 24-4-1. Can I that's utilized for azaleas? Can I use that for other plants, vegetables, flowers? How do you know, etc.? Any thoughts? Oh, I'm not sure if Mandy's able to hear me there.
Am I muted? Oh, no, here we go. Sorry.
There you go. Yep.
Yeah, you know what? I actually am not sure about that one. I haven't used that one before. I use Kelpman for the most part and Jordan's great mixes. So I'm sorry about that one. I don't have any experience there. Yeah,
my only thoughts on it there, right, is that 24-4-1. So our nitrogen's 24, our phosphorus is 4, our potassium's 1. So that is a really, really heavy nitrogen feed. So what plants like high nitrogen? That would be our leafy greens. And so I would maybe consider playing around with that on some of your leafy greens. But then for your flowering plants and for your rooted crops, I probably wouldn't utilize that because they're just going to put all of their energy into kind of like the foliage growth and not into floral or into root growth beneath the surface there. All right, last question here was from Polly. So this last question we'll take for the evening here. Polly asked, I saw that you had 4 tomatoes in one pot and I have 3 in this one here. I'm notorious for this. How do you go about transplanting them so you don't ultimately ruin them? So I quite literally, even at the point of transplanting, I rip them and I just pop them like that and I pop them into the bed. Does that do some damage to the root system? I'm sure that it does. Have I ever lost a plant baby at the point of transplanting? No. So it has worked really, really well for me. And this is once again where it's like there's not one right way and one wrong way to be kind of transplanting and just going about gardening, but rather I'm a little bit lazy. I want to keep them in there. I don't have all the room under my grow lights to have each of them in their own pot. And so I'm going to transplant them, make sure that they're all set up for success. And very, very quickly, they are off to the races, absolutely thriving there. So hope that sheds a little bit of light on kind of why and how I approach it in that perspective. Amazing questions that have been coming through from everybody here. And so on that front, folks, before you take off for the evening, what I encourage you to do is just subscribe to the channel here, because you're then going to get notified when we release new videos, and any comments or questions that we did not answer this evening, or any questions that you have over the course of the season, you can just leave those on any one of the videos, and then we will get a response to you on that exact question within 24 hours. And it could be a video about like preparing soils, and you could be talking about like harvesting garlic. I'll still answer it on that video within 24 hours. So you'll get a response from us super quickly there. But folks, that is everything for this evening here. Thank you all so much for the amazing questions. Warm weather is on the way. And actually, one last final thing before we sign off here. Next week, you're going to be the first people that know this. We're going to announce it on Saturday, but we are launching something brand new. And it is another kind of form. It's not a product. It's another form of gardening education. And so we're going to shed more light on this on Saturday, but I want to tell each of you what it is, because you've hung around for the entirety of the session. And so rather than just doing our happy hours like this, we are going to be launching a gardening talk show. And so once per month, I am going to be bringing on a guest, an absolute expert in an area of gardening, and think of it as a live podcast where I'm essentially going to be interviewing them on that topic of expertise on their end and getting all that information. And you're going to be able to send through questions in the chat function just like this for me to ask to them live. So you'll be able to listen to it. There won't be as much going on the screen. It's going to be more just kind of like conversational and dialogue, but I'm really excited about it. And our first guest that's coming on next week is Ashley Essikin, who is a soil scientist over in Saskatchewan. She's got a YouTube channel as well called Gardening in Canada. She's got 26,000 subscribers on there. She was doing a happy hour kind of similar to this with Lee Valley earlier today. And so she's going to be joining next Thursday. Her and I are going to be talking about all things soil. So start thinking through your questions, and then expect to see an email from us on Saturday of this weekend with the RSVP for that. I'm so excited for it, and the guests that we're going to bring on over the course of the season. All right, cat's out of the bag on that one. I got to run. If you have questions, you can find me on the website in the live chat function this evening. Thank you all so much for the beautiful evening. Can't wait to see you all either next week on that one or on our next happy hour. And until then, folks, go get those hands dirty.